To start us off, I'd like to pass it over to Brandon Gehrke Quintanilla, co-founder of Aurora Unidos CSO and co-chair of Legalization for All Network, which has chapters that have been on the front lines fighting against ICE in DC, LA, and Minneapolis. And we're interested to hear more about the connections between how Palantir is being used to target immigrants as well. So, welcome, Brandon.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm glad to be here with everyone today. Even if I can't see anyone, I'm here in spirit. But yeah, my name is Brandon. I'm an organizer with Aurora CSO. We're actually relatively new. We've only been around as an organization locally for about a year now, with the second election of Donald Trump. And I'm also a co-chair of Legalization for All Network. L4A is actually made up of about 30 different chapters across the country, and we've been seeing rapid growth in which we've doubled in size within the last year. Because we've seen so much resistance and fighting back against what's happening in our communities, the organization has been able to grow and expand its ability to fight back. But yeah, with cities taking up campaigns across the country, for example, stronger sanctuary ordinances in Minneapolis, unmasking ICE in Jacksonville, fighting back against political oppression in LA, resulting in the freeing of Alejandro Orellana and getting his charges dropped. Um, all of our chapters are engaged in the front lines and fighting back against ICE. Locally, we've been able to free 4 immigrants from the Aurora Geo facility by working with their families in the community to help free political prisoners and immigrants from this facility. And we've also been able to stop the expansion of deportation flights at Denver International Airport uh, from Key Lime Air. And most recently, the movement spearheaded by DAWA, Denver Anti-War Action, and we'll have a speaker later on from DAWA, in solidarity with them and different immigrant rights organizations, anti-war organizations, and Palestinian liberation organizations. We were able to push Palantir out of Colorado, push their headquarters out of Denver. And this is the same company that helps carry out genocide in Gaza and brutalizes our communities at home by assisting ICE. Um, so with a little bit more time, I wanted to speak about a local incident that happened. I do dispatch for our rapid response network here locally. So we basically receive calls for whenever ICE is out in the neighborhood. And I got a call out here in Lakewood, which is basically like the west side of Denver, of a man that had an order for deportation in which he noticed an unmarked car with tinted windows in his parking lot at his apartment building. He was scared that it was potentially ICE, and he was right, unfortunately. He had left his apartment to go to work when ICE accidentally crashed into his car when he fled back into his apartment building where his young child was, and he remained there for over 6 hours, unable to leave his apartment, and while ICE was waiting for him to leave. During this period, ICE worked on acquiring a warrant and eventually broke down his door, leaving his family and his young daughter without their father, left him with the cost of getting his car back and replacing his door. Um, and all of this, it's possible because of Palantir's system. So luckily, we were able to get him in contact with lawyers and resources when we had dozens of people show up on scene to fight back. But in this incident, it was one of the few examples locally where we've seen local police departments actually collaborate with ICE to make sure that people can actually help out and block off the area. But as far as Palantir's involvement, they've been implementing systems like Immigration OS, which I'm sure we'll hear more about, which was actually implemented in early September of last year. And Palantir has been using it ever since. But it essentially allows them to easily track people, figure out and predict where they might be for their workplaces. And one quick thing that it allows them to do is quickly acquire warrants, in which they might not have been able to in the past. Sometimes it would have taken days. Now, in certain cases, it can take hours. this is what happened in this case, in which he was, basically like waited out until they got that warrant and until they could actually break into his apartment. Um, but Palantir hasn't just recently gotten involved with ICE. They've actually had contracts with Palantir has had contracts with ICE ever since 2013 with their old Falcon software, and has now just reestablished their contract up until 2027, which significantly speeds up the process for generating these leads and analyzing data and ultimately breaking up families and tearing people apart. So we're going to continue to fight back against Palantir and any of the mechanisms that ICE uses to detain and deport and terrorize our communities. So with that, that's pretty much all I have speak on for my introduction, but I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, up next we'll hear from Hatem Teirelbar, who is an organizer with Denver Anti-War Action. So following a year of creative and consistent struggle from DAWA, Denver Anti-War Action, Palantir has officially announced that its headquarters location will be leaving Denver, and the Anti-War Action Network is thrilled to celebrate this major campaign victory and hear from Hatem about your group's organizing experience. So go ahead.
Thank you, Elinor. First of all, I'd like to thank DAWA and the Anti-War Action Network for giving me the opportunity to speak today. It's a huge honor. And second, I would like to offer my sincere apologies to the good people of Florida, who deserve much better neighbors than Palantir. However, I have full confidence that you will rise to the occasion and send Palantir packing, just like Denver and Palo Alto have. DAWA leads the fight against Palantir in Denver, and we achieved victory by using organized people power, because we know that when we fight, we win. I'm here to give an overview of how DAWA led the fight against Palantir in Denver, starting with why we decided to target them. There's two aspects to this decision, Palantir's atrocities in Gaza and the local conditions in Denver that made them a suitable target. And I'd like to thank Elinor for giving us a broad overview of what Palantir does with data, and concretize it by talking about something called the kill chain. The kill chain is a set of 6 steps that starts with collecting massive amounts of data about people, places, and people's activities, and it ends with an explosion. The steps in that kill chain are, first, identify. That means taking all this data, tying it together, so that you're associating people's movements with their real identities, with their location, their activities, and their political affiliation. And based on that, the IOF decides who should be killed. The next 2 steps are targeting and filtering, which basically mean tying that data to a location that can be bombed at a certain time to kill a target. Fourth, you prioritize. That's deciding who should be bombed and when. Fifth, you assign. That means picking a drone, artillery piece, or a human-flown plane that actually executes a strike. And the final step is fire. Launch the strike, kill the target, and a whole lot of civilians besides. Now, Palantir provides technologies to Israel and the US Department of Defense that process huge amounts of data to perform almost all of those steps. You might have heard this referred to as Project Maven. The Department of Defense has been sharing Maven and related technologies with Israel almost since their inception. So while Palantir's official cooperation started with Israel after October 7th, 2023, Palantir has actually been indirectly assisting the IOF commit war crimes for much, much longer. And the version of the kill chain I just described, which is already pretty dark, that's actually the sanitized version. When you get into the details, things are much more horrifying. The mass murder of civilians is actually built into the process. I'm sure you've seen videos of the IOF bombing Gaza where they'll take down a whole apartment building with one shot. Now, it's entirely possible, likely even, that there's only one target, one person in that whole building that the IOF is actually trying to kill. But they'll take down the whole thing. And it gets worse. There's a program that's designed to track movement patterns and strike a target specifically when they get home. This program is called Where's Daddy because it kills people alongside their whole family. So the horrific rate of civilian casualties, the so-called collateral damage, it's built in and unmitigated. Palantir is a huge part of the US and Israeli war machines, and it's an incredibly destructive, inhumane portion to boot. Palantir's role has grown. It used a modified version of Anthropic's AI, called Claude, to generate targets during the US strike on Venezuela and in Iran over the last few weeks. So if you've been wondering how the US managed to strike 1,000 targets in one day, now you know. Dawa was horrified to learn all of this, and we held a teach-in in January 2025 about Palantir. That's actually where most of the information I gave you comes from, except for the last bit about Iran and Venezuela. We're not psychic. Now, from what I've said so far, it should be clear why Palantir is such an important target for the anti-war movement. These atrocities are a huge part of why Dawa decided to target them. But it's not the only part. I'd like to take a step back from what Palantir does and instead talk about what Dawa was doing in early 2025. Back then, we were leading a campaign against Lockheed Martin, trying to get them evicted from one of their buildings. And while this was a worthy goal, we learned some things about Palantir that made it a more suitable target than Lockheed. First, Palantir's global headquarters were in Denver, meaning a campaign against them would have a bigger impact than a campaign against just one of many Lockheed locations. Second, those headquarters were actually smack dab in the middle of downtown Denver, while the closest Lockheed facility was outside the city limits. So it was way easier to mobilize people to Palantir's headquarters than to the Lockheed building. And third, Palantir actually rents commercial real estate, like normal office space, unlike Lockheed Martin, whose locations are typically on federal land and much harder to dislodge. Because of Palantir's substantial and horrifying role in the genocide in Gaza and favorable local conditions in Denver, Dawa decided to end our Lockheed campaign and begin an anti-Palantir campaign. That turned out to be the right decision, because we were able to mobilize a lot more people against Palantir. And these actions were designed to put pressure on Palantir's landlords to cancel their lease or at least not renew it. And we also put pressure on Palantir's neighbors, hoping they would complain to the landlords and add to that pressure. Now, our campaign really took off in April 2025. That's when we had our first march against Palantir. But since then, there have been dozens of actions against Palantir. At least 28 rallies, marches, pickets, car rallies, and internal disruptions have been led by Dawa and our allies right outside Palantir's headquarters. We held most of these during business hours, but changed the day and time to maximize disruption. In addition, there have been numerous actions like tabling, sign making, and canvassing designed to grow the size and strength of the anti-Palantir movement. I can confidently say that not a week went by without some action being taken against Palantir, and this was a 44-week campaign. So, although Dawa leads the movement against Palantir, we don't fight alone. We reached out to our existing allies in the Palestine movement. We reached out to some newly formed groups that were dedicated to opposing Palantir, and some organizations in the immigrants' rights movement to form an anti-Palantir coalition. A couple factors were very influential in the formation of the coalition. First, in October 2025, Palantir announced that they would actually be moving from downtown Denver to a neighborhood called Cherry Creek, elsewhere in Denver, at some point in the future. And second, the immigrants' rights movement was surging, and a lot more information came to light, like what Brandon just shared, about Palantir's involvement with ICE. Because of this, we worked to bring immigrants' rights organizations into the coalition, uniting the Palestine movement and immigrants' rights movement against a common enemy. The coalition then united that we should pressure the new location into canceling its agreement with Palantir, hopefully leaving them homeless. To that end, our first coalition action was an all-day picket in November at the office building in Cherry Creek where Palantir planned to move into, and that action was a great success. Since, the coalition has grown and carried out our largest, most successful anti-Palantir actions. But we built it gradually. We started with one meeting to plan one action and implemented just a few norms like democratic decision-making and the St. Paul's principles. We avoided extensive points of unity or formalizing the coalition too much, because this let us accomplish what we needed to without being diverted by ideological disagreements or getting bogged down in procedure. All of this work was supposed to culminate in what we called Pressure Week. In February, we had good reason to believe Palantir's move to Cherry Creek was imminent, and so we had to step up the pressure. The coalition planned to have an action every day during a specific week in March, outside the building Palantir would soon move into. However, on February 17th, Palantir surprised everyone by throwing in the towel early and fleeing to Florida. Now, there's a lot more I could talk about, like specific tactics that we used or community outreach efforts, the undeniable effective media coverage, and so on. I'd be really happy to answer questions about any of those, but I'd like to conclude my remarks for now with 3 key lessons that led to our victory. First, we picked a suitable target based on the capabilities of our organization and our local conditions. This let us leverage our power very effectively and deal a more significant blow to the enemy. Second, we engaged in effective coalition building by uniting as many relevant forces as possible, but doing so in a limited and focused way. Third, and most important in my opinion, persistence is crucial. We used constant, frequent actions with a wide variety of tactics to put pressure on our targets and reduce our own fatigue. And that, my friends, is how the people of Denver beat Palantir.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hatem. Thank you for that comprehensive analysis and summary. And we will be getting back to the Palantir's journey away from Denver in a moment. But right now, I'm going to pass it to our next speaker, Maeve Aickin, who is an activist with the Minnesota Anti-War Committee, where they have been leading the divestment fight against the Minnesota State Board of Investment. And last fall, they won a victory when they got the state to divest from most of its Israel bonds holdings. And since Minnesota has been under the occupation of ICE this winter, the Minnesota Anti-War Committee has turned their sights toward Palantir now, with which the Minnesota State Board of Investment also invests in. So we look forward to hearing from Maeve about their latest efforts against Palantir. Go ahead, Maeve.
Thanks so much, Elinor. Thank you all for being here. Thank you especially to my fellow Minnesotans who are foregoing our first day of shorts weather to attend this webinar. I appreciate you. I'm Maeve. I organize with the Anti-War Committee in Minneapolis as a member of the Divest MN subcommittee. I'm going to briefly outline the objectives of the campaign before I discuss our recent tactical decision to foreground Palantir and our organizing in greater depth. So through the Divest Minnesota from Apartheid Israel campaign, the AWC's primary target is the State Board of Investment, which is chaired by Governor Tim Walz. Many of you are probably familiar with him on account of his recent press tours. In 1985, the SBI divested public employee pension funds from corporations profiting from South African apartheid after facing widespread pressure from grassroots organizations, mostly Black-led, including Friends for a Nonviolent World and the Minnesota Anti-Apartheid Legislative Coalition. Our campaign uses this precedent to demand that the SBI take Minnesota money out of companies responsible for creating the very architecture and infrastructure of Israel's crimes of apartheid and genocide against the Palestinian people. The total value of the SBI's current investments in these companies is $5.6 billion. Palantir was on our divestment list long before Operation Metro Surge because of its close partnership with the Israeli state and the $55 million pension dollars that the SBI invests in it. Due in part to its obfuscation of its forward-deployed software engineer model and its fabricated air of mystery, public familiarity with Palantir in the Twin Cities was relatively low prior to ICE's occupation. However, as ICE detained, deported, and murdered Minnesotans this year, we watched our neighbors get radicalized against state violence and informed about the technologies that enable it. As an aside, Minneapolis was the site of another popular uprising in 2020 following MPD's lynching of George Floyd, but we didn't see the same scale, distribution, and consistency in political activity due in part to the elements of white chauvinism that structure our social and material geographies. The first public reports of Palantir's collaboration with U.S. law enforcement to implement racist predictive policing programs through network databases came out in 2015. So it's a shame that we're having these conversations 11 years later, but it's also a blessing that we're finally having them. In the past 2 months, we've observed a new and specific animosity toward Palantir when we've name-dropped it at actions. A brief mention of Alex Karp or Peter Thiel in a speech will inevitably yield boos or a cry of "fuck Palantir." For many working people who had not been previously activated, Operation Metro Surge helped us to clarify our enemies and our targets. So in the Divest MN subcommittee, we discussed strategies for adapting our campaign to our shift in material conditions because we had an opportunity to connect the hyper-local threat of ICE violence as facilitated by products like Elite and ICM to Palantir's use of Gaza as an incubator of data borders, surveillance, and the use of technology to assign state subjects proximity to the sociogenic paradigm of who gets to be human. Simultaneously, we struggled with the tension of connecting Palantir's operations in Gaza to its operations in the Twin Cities, while foregrounding our core belief that it is our responsibility as beneficiaries of U.S. imperialism to dismantle the economic tools of imperialism, regardless of the extent to which they are used against us in the belly of the beast. Essentially, we didn't want to be sending the message that Palantir is only a worthy target now that its products are being weaponized against white Americans. Sham Sankar, Palantir's CTO, who's also a U.S. Army Reserve colonel, describes Palantir's collaboration with military contractors as the work of optimizing the kill chain, which is something that Hatem talked about. And through Palantir's $10 billion contract with the U.S. military and its development of Maven, the targets along that kill chain have included the Axis of Resistance, the Gaza Riviera Ethnic Cleansing Project, and the murder of dozens of people in Caracas during President Maduro's kidnapping. Amy Goodman recently reported that the U.S. is using Maven to select airstrike targets in Iran, meaning that Palantir technology could have plausibly helped orchestrate the U.S. double-tap strike on the girls' school in Minab. Tim Walz likes trying to score political points with us by reminding us that he's a former public school teacher, but he doesn't like it when we remind him that he has a responsibility to his educator peers, both in Minnesota and across the globe. Palantir technology likely identified a school as a priority target, and ICE's implementation of custom-made Palantir technology also denied thousands of students across Minnesota the right to learn this year by transmuting the choice to attend school into the choice to risk violent arrest, incarceration, deportation, and death. Put simply, a former public school teacher is investing public school teachers' pensions, including mine, into Palantir, a company with a vested financial interest in endangering students and educators. And we're trying to make that connection as frequently as possible to invite our neighbors and community members to see themselves as existing within a global network of responsibility and complicity under US imperialism. We chose to center Palantir ahead of this Thursday's State Board of Investment meeting because doing so responds to our current material conditions, grants us an opportunity to expand our base while plugging a wider segment of public workers into our campaign, and it opens the door to setting a divestment precedent that will strengthen our movement and increase the pressure we can level against the SBI. Since the beginning of ICE's occupation, we've developed and disseminated educational materials about Palantir's activity at home and abroad in the form of flyers and social media graphics. We've also held protests specifically targeting Palantir, and we're embarking on a postering campaign as of today with the slogan, "Palantir is watching, you're paying for it." So if you are at the Twin Cities watch party right now, hopefully you will be able to pick up one of Forrest's incredible posters. To close out, I want to reiterate something that Elinor talked about. We had a victory in late 2025 when we learned through a public records request that the SBI had quietly divested $13.3 million of its holdings in Israel bonds. That left only one 470K bond left in the portfolio. This small but meaningful victory strengthened our momentum, and it demonstrated the feasibility and political viability of divestment from Israel despite the SBI's protestations. A similar victory of complete divestment from Palantir would open a door that can't be closed and increase the size of the crowd trying to knock the whole thing down. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Maeve. And I'll echo Kaylee's point in the chat. Chicago has learned so much from AWC Minnesota's divestment campaign to apply to our own State Board of Investment. So it's really great to share this space with y'all today. Cool. So our last speaker before we go into Q&A will be Hannah Collantes from the newly formed South Florida Anti-War Committee. And when Palantir announced that they were leaving Denver, they also announced that they were going to South Florida. So the nice thing for us as being part of a national network is that Palantir cannot escape from us. And so we are now going to hear from Hannah and learn about what the South Florida AWC is going to do to welcome Palantir.
Hello, good evening, or good afternoon for some. My name is Hannah, as I was just introduced, and please bear with me, I am still commuting from work to home, but I did still want to hop on in and share what we've done. Unfortunately, no one in our planning portion of the Anti-War Action Committee of South Florida was able to make it to our recent action of the Palantir Unwelcome Party that was hosted by Mi Gente and also had a lot of individuals from Jewish Voice for Peace there as well. There were about 30 people who showed up. We had some pretty good press coverage, particularly from the Miami New Times. And we actually met this week people from Mi Gente, JVP, the South Florida Action Network, to further brainstorm and plan what else we are going to do, what further actions we're going to take. I believe this one was around the Aventura Mall, where the new headquarters is going to be. They were not allowed due to law enforcement to go inside. We're workshopping with that and thinking about different ideas to go around it. So this was outside, and unfortunately, like a block or so away. As Americans, you know that the malls are massive and parking is even bigger. So we weren't as close and as disruptive, I think, as we would want it to be. But I think it was still very visible, and it still had people learning and finding out about what Palantir is. It was also pretty engaging because they had, I did not get the name, but we did have a woman, a Guatemalan migrant who handmade piñatas of, I believe, Peter Thiel and Donald Trump as well. And, you know, it was a way to tie in the work of the people that are being targeted by ICE, by Palantir, to the greater movement. We liked that. Looks like the press did not seem to spin or skew words. We're And that was around 4 p.m. One moment. I'm looking at all my notes now when I'm on a red light. I think that was most of the information. We're eager to go back again. We can. The good thing about Palantir being in a mall is this place is packed all the time. Any action will be seen by passerby, by people who are just running to the mall for something. And we're working on making more specific goals as well. I know we have an idea, but we just need funding for it about attending, having someone attend the Formula One races. It came out that Ferrari works with Palantir, and they were thinking about doing an action at a Formula One race or some kind of protest. We are also, because a lot of the folks down here don't know a lot of what Palantir does, as we said, we are thinking about what we can do or how we can schedule a teach-in. And Claudia, who's in our anti-war action committee down here in South Florida, I believe attended one that you guys from Denver pulled out, and she's got the materials. So we're just trying to schedule that and keep moving forward. I think that's about all I've got. I can't really read the chat. I'm sorry, I'm moving again in the car. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it made sense. Please feel free to, you can pass out my email if anyone has a question. I don't mind. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hannah. So glad you're able to make it today. We are going to move into our question and answer portion. And so for this section, we will, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat. We've been getting a few questions in already. And we won't be able to, of course, go through every one of them, but we're going to do our best to sift through the questions, make sure that we're doing our best to choose ones that represent a variety of topics. And so our first question is going to be around outreach, and it is, what does outreach around your Palantir campaigns look like, and how do you talk to everyday, regular people in your community about it? So who would like to start us off with this one? Hatem, go ahead.
So Dawa had 3 prongs to our outreach. First, the 50-51 and the No Kings protests, where thousands or tens of thousands of people gather, were probably like where we got to talk to the most people. And it was a good crowd too, because it's people who are already at least a little bit politically active. So we'd have our table and we'd have people giving out flyers. And actually, our outreach work, as well as the general increase in media coverage of Palantir, paid dividends. I remember from in the early days of the campaign, I would be at the table and I'd have to try and explain Palantir in 1 or 2 sentences, which is not easy. And by the end, I'd just say we're fighting Palantir and people would sign up. So this work does pay off, especially if you can get journalists involved. The second prong of our outreach was things like banner drops, where we had a QR code to our website. We actually got a website specifically to link this code to it, and we put our banners down over highways during rush hour when people would have nothing better to do than stare at the banner and hopefully scan the code. And third was something more innovative. We actually tried to get the local business community to stand against Palantir. Remember how I mentioned that Palantir was going to move to a second location within Denver? Well, we started canvassing there every week for a while, getting people to sign a petition against Palantir, and also trying to get the businesses themselves to sign on, so we could say like, oh, this store stands against Palantir, and we would ask them to hang up a flyer with a link to the petition and saying that they're standing against Palantir in their front windows. Um, that that was very new for us, this amount of community outreach. And so we were honestly only really starting to put all of it together, and coordinate it around the time that we actually won our campaign. But it's definitely something we'll work into the future. And if Palantir is in a mall, seems like it could be very handy in Florida as well.
Okay, thank you, Hatem. I'll pass it to Brandon.
Um, yeah, I think it's really important. Outreach is one of the most important parts of a campaign. Is doing some base building to get like everyday people involved in what actions you're doing and like bringing awareness to it. Something that a lot of our L4A chapters do is something called barrio walks, where we actually walk around in our community and talk to people, go to businesses, and table out in the community. I've had plenty of conversations talking with people about ICE and how it impacts their day-to-day life. Um, and we can work Palantir into that conversation. A lot of these movements, work together. Uh, and what Hatim was bringing up earlier, that like the solidarity between movements, it really brings out a lot of different sectors of the community and a lot of different sectors of people. Um, and then I think one other thing that I would like to bring up is Fight Back News. I think it's a really good resource for people to communicate like, hey, these are our actions and what's working for us, what isn't working for us, and to make that with people. Something a lot of different organizations do in Denver is we actually have like a print version of Fight Back that we do on a monthly basis, where we actually have like articles from like the anti-war movement, from the immigrant rights movement, and hand those out at like protests or whatever. And it's really like concise way to I don't know, kind of summate with people like what's going on in the movement and how to get involved. And yeah.
Thank you, Brandon. All right, go ahead, Maeve.
Yeah, just really briefly, I wanted to brag about how cool this design is that our member Forrest is. Ooh, sorry, I was getting a message from Zoom. Zoom is watching us just like Palantir is. I think we're kind of in a different position than especially Dawa, because our campaign is very much a direct response to demonstrated community interest. Palantir is one of dozens of corporations that we're trying to get the SBI to divest from. And we started noticing at Actions that there was a lot of activation around this. And I was just noticing, like, when I was monitoring school pickups at the beginning of the surge, I'd be talking to, suburban moms who are just like hanging out to try to make sure all the kids get on the bus safely. And I would bring up Palantir. And like a year ago, I feel like it would be, what's that? Would be the first response. And now the first response was like, oh my gosh, I was just reading this article on like 404. It just felt like suddenly everyone was angry about this company. And based on where you are, that Palantir might not be the corporation that gets people riled up. And I think responding to your base in that way is really critical. Where like, if I think about the divestment list, I'm not going to say like Palantir is the most evil corporation on it, because there are so many evil corporations on it. And how can you compare like Elbit and RTX and Palantir? But ultimately, if Palantir is going to be the window that gets people to come in, that's what we're trying to take advantage of right now. And where you are within your specific community, it might not be Palantir. It might be, that a data center is being built in your backyard and people are riled up about the corporation that's stealing your energy and your municipal water with that data center. That's a way to get people into divestment. So I guess the outreach, I felt like people were doing it for themselves, and we had a responsibility as organizers within our community to respond to it.
Thank you, Maeve. Yeah, this is a really important question, and these have been really amazing answers. And I'll just, before I move on to the next question, wanted to see if any of our other panelists here want to answer that one. If not, I can move on to question number 2. So we have a question. What if your What if your local conditions are not favorable to target Palantir? Or if they are, we are not able to find out many ties between Palantir and local businesses. There is a lot of anti-surveillance sentiment locally, but it seems like there is no trace of Palantir whatsoever. Okay, so yeah, this is Maeve was sort of getting into the answer of this in her last response. Does anybody want to take a stab at this one?
I guess my gut reaction is then maybe you don't go after Palantir. I do think there's the Dan DePrima poem that ends like it will take all of us knocking at the thing from different angles to bring it down. And I think that's true of Palantir, but I also think if there isn't a community need for this organizing, maybe you find another way in, and eventually that will connect to Palantir just because of the way of our economy functions. That said, I would look at where your public worker pensions are being invested, because I would be kind of shocked if Palantir wasn't on that list.
That's a really great point. Thank you. Hatem, go ahead.
Yeah, I unite with Maeve. Palantir shouldn't be everyone's main campaign. Having said that, I think there could be ways to support areas where the Palantir work is at the forefront, holding an educational event, boosting actions like call-ins or email-ins where you don't have to be in physical proximity to Palantir to help. That could be very beneficial. But as Maeve said, and as I made a point of during my introduction, your local conditions matter the most when it comes to picking your campaign.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
I have, I guess, something to add. Here in Florida, or at least in South Florida, we are in a landscape that, for us as well as anyone else listening, is very difficult to get people physically together because we're all so far apart. It's also so hard because of the strength of the right over here. So I just wanted to echo the line of trying to find something that matters more to your community and showing how interconnected, as we all know, these things are and how they all feed each other, and it's all one big cycle. I just wanted to read that.
Absolutely. Okay. I'll move us right along then, since we got a lot of questions coming in, and I do enjoy this one. It's are there recommended talking points for exposing Palantir that have been successful when talking with very pro AI people, especially in the workplace? Anybody encounter that? Talking points for exposing Palantir that have been successful when talking to pro AI people.
I guess I'm struggling to imagine being in a workplace with pro AI people. But once I get past that hurdle, I do think like there is a general "don't tread on me" sentiment that when you tap into that, discussions about Palantir become a lot easier, because people who say they don't want to be tread on, as soon as they understand the extent to which these multi-billion-dollar corporations are able to tread all over them and their loved ones' data privacy, that does seem to get to people, and it feels weird to be framing the argument in terms of individual harm, because I always come back to, like, this is a corporation that is facilitating genocide. That is wrong, and I have a responsibility to try to dismantle it. And so I think I often have a hard time, like, doing the mental gymnastics to reframing the corporation as something that has, like, a direct impact on individual people's lives. But often that's the way you get in. So I would love to hear, especially from Brandon, some of your thoughts on how to make it.
Yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, care about their privacy, especially if they're more like, I don't know, pro AI or even like right wing, I guess. And I think kind of like exposing that like Palantir like does not give a shit about any of that. They will, um, track your data and use it against you. And I think bringing like a personal element of like how this has physically been impacting people is like super important. Like we're all humans. We don't want to see people dying in the street. But Palantir is facilitating, like quite frankly. They are tracking people's data. They are figuring out where they work, where they live, when they leave for work to figure out the best opportunity for ICE to detain them, to kidnap them. And in Gaza, they're using this data to figure out like what buildings to bomb. That's insane. Like I think bringing that personal element, hopefully should make anyone favorable towards fighting against Palantir. Yeah, and the privacy elements are really good.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else for this question before we move on? Okay. Our next question is, after seeing success in Denver, are there tactics or ideas you would recommend being applied against Palantir in Florida? And that's not directed at anyone specific, but yeah, anyone want to take a stab at that? Hatem.
So I would start off by cautioning against trying to copy paste the Denver strategy to somewhere else. In general, you can't really do that with campaigns, but I can give some of the tactics that we've used. One thing we did when we were in like the earlier stage of escalation and were trying not to do something too risky, but that would still be disruptive, was that we would print out paper flyers and stick them on Palantir's buildings with gaff tape. And this meant that there was little risk of damage, so people were pretty unlikely to be hit with vandalism charges. Now, the Palantir security did take them down pretty quickly, but what we figured out we could do was like put the tape on the end of a flagpole, and you could actually attach it really high up, and then it would take them until like an hour after the action to actually take things down, because they'd have to go get the ladder and then move it for each flyer, and that helped raise awareness. We actually used a lot of like visually interesting props to draw attention to their headquarters, because otherwise it just looks like any other office building. We did a vigil with shrouds outside, bloodstained shrouds that would look like bodies, essentially. That was pretty eye-catching. We also used crime scene tape or caution tape, again, visually provocative. And we had little flyers with that said war crimes in progress. So yeah, we definitely tried to vary it up so that there were both things that we could do on the organizing side of thing that would help us get closer to each other, that would make the actions feel less repetitive. We would take the streets and march pretty often and do noise disruptions. That's pretty normalized in Denver. Like we'll take a small street with 20 to 25 people. It's not like that everywhere, obviously. But we could slow down traffic in an area, and again, just really draw attention with pots and pans and that kind of thing. On one occasion, we did a lobby disruption where we had a bunch of folks go into the building's lobby and throw flyers everywhere and chant about Palestine, basically until the cops threatened to arrest them. And we actually did this at the same time that we had a march, so that way the people who are disrupting had like a whole crowd, maybe 20 feet away, just outside the building, cheering them on. And that really helped keep morale up. And it really made Palantir tighten up their security. Like after that happened, they've had people out before we're there, and they block off the area, make the building keycard access only. So that does interfere with their operations a bit. One moment.
Hatem, did you have anything else? Or you got up? I wasn't sure if you were gonna go back to talking.
I'm sorry. No, I think I'm done for now.
Okay, no worries. Thank you so much. Yeah, I love how creative y'all have been. Does anybody else want to chime in on this one? Maybe someone who knows something about Florida? Brandon?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is kind of like developing an escalation like tactics. Because we're not gonna just start from like doing what Hatem was talking about of like going inside and disrupting. But how do we build up to that? We need to like raise people's consciousness to like understand like, oh, this is what Palantir is doing. A good way to start out, maybe like a teach-in if a lot of people don't know about it. But like by doing some of those early actions, we can actually change some of our conditions and make people more willing to be involved with the campaign. Yeah, so kind of test out, like see what works and develop, some of the campaign over time. I think the anti-Palantir coalition here, led by Dawa, came up with some really creative stuff. I know at one point we were trying to do like a sit-in, but Palantir surprised us all, and I don't think we got to that point because they already moved.
You scared them away. They didn't want the embarrassment. Oh, well, this question, okay, so this next question is actually, I think, geared toward our Denver people. Now that Palantir is out of Denver, where do you set your goals now? Hatem?
So that is an excellent question that I do not have a concrete answer to, because there's a lot of considerations. First of all, I think I need to clarify that while Palantir has moved their headquarters to Florida, or is moving them very soon, we're actually investigating whether that means Palantir is also completely getting rid of their offices in Denver, or if they'll still maintain a local branch here that's not their headquarters. In which case, we have good reason to keep trying to kick Palantir out. Alternatively, it's possible that they are just completely leaving, in which case there's the option of legislation against AI. That's something we've been talking about for a long time that is actually building in the public consciousness. And so it's something that we could pursue next year, hoping to either ban Palantir's practices or make it extremely expensive and inconvenient for them to operate in Colorado. And then there is also the possibility that because conditions have changed, we're um, we're moving past Palantir entirely just because there is now this war with Iran, and we may actually have to dedicate all or most of our energy to that. So yeah, TLDR, we're looking into things we don't really know yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. I think, okay, next question we have. I'd be particularly curious actually about hearing about this from Maeve. It's how do you coordinate with your neighbors while being security conscious? And the reason I am curious about that is because of the heightened repression that you were facing during this winter in Minneapolis. And so, yeah, I'll pass that to you if you don't mind. And then anyone else can also answer after that too.
Yeah, thank you, Elinor. I think one real blessing was it felt like that infrastructure got built very quickly and by very many people in very many places working on very different things at the same time. I think we were prepared to the extent that we were for Metro Surge because organizers in Chicago had done such an extraordinary job like documenting strategies and documenting how you created your rapid response networks and how you got the neighborhood signal groups kind of going and vetted, how you distributed whistles. Like all of that was archived and documented, and those resources for organizers here made it a lot easier to plug people in. So I feel like by the time we started targeting Palantir, there already were all of these signal networks that had been vetted by regular people. I'm going to even say people who didn't consider themselves organizers prior to the beginning of the ICE occupation. So I was definitely like using my specific neighborhood networks. And when I would be doing like patrols with people I didn't know very well in my neighborhood, it was something I could talk to them about. And there is a certain level of trust that you just have to assume. And so I can't speak to an intense security culture because when you're in the kind of emergency situation that so many people in Minneapolis were suddenly in, um, there were risks we had to take in terms of trusting one another. But I really think I just want to thank the great people of Chicago for documenting what they had done so it was easy to have that information and then innovate upon it and evolve it to our specific material conditions. Um, yeah, I've never been like a great security culture. I'm never going to change my Signal username. It's just going to be Maeve until I die. So I'm maybe not the best person to answer this question. But I do think that balance of trust in your neighbors and recognition that sharing certain information in certain spaces could endanger someone else's lives, the life of one of your neighbors. That's the balance we've been trying to strike.
Thank you. Appreciate that answer. Brandon, do you have any thoughts on this question too?
Yeah, I think this is actually a really great question of like, how do we deal with fighting back against repression? I think LA really was like a shining example of this with Alejandro Orellana of like public defense campaigns. I think the reason why it was successful is because people were very public, calling the DA's office, calling the sheriff's office immediately uh, when that happened, when he was taken from his home to demand his release. And he was released like within the day. And it only took like a few months to drop those charges. But that was possible because people knew who he was. His neighbors were out there defending him because they thought there was an ICE raid happening when it was an FBI raid. Um, so people knew instantly that he was being, targeted. So I really want to emphasize that like we should be open about who we are and like what we're doing. We're not doing anything bad. we're fighting to like for our own liberation and fighting back against oppression. We should be proud of that, and we should be open and honest and fighting back against this repression because that's how we've won and that's how we're going to continue to win.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that question and I appreciate these answers. Does anybody else have anything to add to this question? Okay, and then up next, and this will probably be one of our last questions, is this also looks like geared maybe more toward Denver, but you mentioned a focused coalition against Palantir in Denver. What did that look like? Was it mainly spearheaded by Dawa, or was it meeting separately as like a standing coalition?
So the coalition, so in Denver, we have what's called the Colorado Palestine Coalition. It has the local chapters of national organizations like USPCN, JVP, FRSO, DSA, and so on, as well as some local organizations. We actually started with Palantir organizing within this existing framework, but as it became clear that we needed to bring the immigrants' rights movement in, we basically invited all the organizations from that coalition to a meeting with some immigrants' rights organizations. And like I said, we built this very gradually. We would tell people, yes, we want to have this is our campaign against Palantir. We want to be in for the long haul, but we just want you to come to this meeting to plan an action against Palantir. And that way everyone could get some experience working together. So it was mostly groups that we already had some history with, as well as a few newer groups. And I'm sorry, I think I've lost track of part of the question. Could you repeat it for me?
Of course, no worries. The whole question is you mentioned a focused coalition against Palantir in Denver. What did that look like? Was it mainly spearheaded by Dawa, or was it meeting separately as a standing coalition? So it sounds like you covered a lot of it, but go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so it was mainly spearheaded by Dawa. There were other organizations who were very active in it, but it was generally Dawa who would make the call that we should have an action and have a meeting about it. I think it was typically facilitated by a Dawa member. Having said that, now there are different opinions on where it should go, and we're all kind of researching and thinking about that separately for a little while.
Okay, amazing. Well, it looks like we're at about 5:15, so I think that since we've mainly sifted through the questions that are a lot of questions sort of represent a similar type of thing. So I think we're gonna go ahead and start wrapping up here today. But thank you so much to all of our amazing speakers. If y'all can just give them some love in the chat, that'd be great. Thank you for being out here today, and for everybody else too who came out. It's so important that we use our collective organization and our collective strategizing to unite with each other all across the country in the anti-war movement. So before I let everybody go, just want to shout out that the Anti-War Action Network is calling on everyone to attend your city's No Kings protest this upcoming Saturday, March 28th, to build unity with the broader anti-Trump movement. And we encourage everyone to uplift the demands around no war with Iran, since Trump is acting like a king and by blatantly violating international law, not just in Iran, but also in Venezuela earlier with these decapitation strikes, And we need to bring as many people as possible into this fight. We need to call on our government to respect national sovereignty. And yeah, so make sure that you keep an eye out for news in your town. Get plugged in to an anti-war organization if you can. And we will see you at the next AWON event. So with that, we will end the webinar, and I hope everybody has an amazing afternoon. Take care, y'all.